They had prepared themselves for the worst. When Anna Weber and a group of fellow German Red Cross nurses were captured in the summer of 1944, they fully expected punishment. They imagined forced labor, endless interrogations, or humiliating treatment at the hands of the Americans. After years of propaganda, they believed that enemy women were destined for scorn, not dignity. But nothing could have prepared them for what actually awaited them. Arrival at camp. The transport buses rattled through the gates of a sprawling American facility. At first glance, it looked like any other POW camp: barbed wire, guard towers, rows of barracks. But inside the compound, Anna noticed something strange. Beyond the fences, there were paved streets, a brick hospital building, and, most surprising of all, groups of American women in crisp white uniforms. American nurses, Greta whispered beside her. Why would they work near prisoners? The German women braced for hostility. Instead, the American staff greeted them with clinical efficiency, ushering them into medical examinations, providing clean clothing, and even offering coffee. A different kind of assignment. Within days, the Germans were surprised again. Instead of being confined to menial tasks, they were told they would assist in the hospital wards. Anna assumed this meant caring for wounded POWs or cleaning supplies. But when the assignments were handed out, her heart skipped a beat. "You will rotate through the maternity ward," the American matron announced. The words struck like thunder. Maternity ward? Surely there was some mistake. They were prisoners of war, enemy nurses. Why would Americans trust them with something so delicate, so sacred as childbirth? The first birth, Anna's introduction to American maternity care, came swiftly. Within her first week, a young American mother went into labor. Anna entered the ward expecting to be kept at a distance. Instead, the supervising nurse placed gloves in her hands. "Help us prepare," the American instructed. The room was bright, lit with powerful electric lamps. Stainless steel instruments lay arranged on sterile trays. Clean linens covered the bed, while monitors ticked steadily. For Anna, who had delivered babies in dim German homes with little more than boiling water and rags, it was like stepping into another world. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Anna held her breath. She expected to be ignored, yet the American nurse turned to her and said, "Well done, colleague. Pass me the blanket." Colleague. The word rattled in her chest. For the first time, she was not an enemy. She was a nurse again. The shock of abundance. In the days that followed, the German women saw more than they could comprehend. Shelves stacked with sterile dressings, bottles of vitamins and nutritional supplements for mothers, refrigerated cabinets filled with vaccines for newborns. Greta shook her head one morning as she sterilized instruments. Our women give birth in cellars while bombs fall above them. And here, they are given everything they need, even prisoners like us. The contrast was unbearable. Letters from home spoke of hunger and stillbirths. Here, babies cried into clean blankets, their mothers smiling with relief. A quiet revelation. The most profound moment came weeks later, when Anna cradled a newborn to its mother. The young woman, exhausted but glowing, whispered a simple "thank you." It was the first time in Anna's captivity that anyone had thanked her. The gratitude of an enemy mother pierced through years of indoctrination. She wrote in her hidden diary that night, "Today I held a life born into the hands of an enemy. Yet in that moment there was no war, no nation, only a child and a mother. And I was allowed to help. What does this mean for everything I believed? A dangerous question." The other German nurses felt the same dissonance. In the barracks, they whispered late at night, "Why would they trust us? Why treat us as colleagues? What if the Reich lied about America entirely?" No one dared say it too loudly, but the seed was planted. Their enemy had given them not humiliation, but the most sacred duty a nurse could perform, bringing life into the world. And with every cry of a newborn, the old propaganda crumbled further. By the time winter neared, the German nurses understood something their homeland would never admit. In America, even prisoners of war were permitted to witness life, not just death. And in the maternity ward, they were not captives. They were nurses, healers, colleagues. The maternity ward became their new battlefield. But instead of blood and ruin, it was filled with the cries of newborns and the soft hum of medical equipment they had never imagined. Anna Weber, who had once tied rags around women in bombed-out basements, now walked past walls painted in pale blues and creams, past bassinets lined in white sheets that looked impossibly clean. She and her fellow German nurses were still prisoners, uniforms marked with PW, but the American staff spoke to them as if that mark didn't matter. For women who had lived through years of scarcity, it was a transformation that cut deeper than captivity itself. Daily duties. Each morning, the German nurses joined American counterparts in preparing the ward. Instruments were sterilized in hissing autoclaves. Bottles of formula were lined up neatly, warmed and ready. Charts with precise records of each mother's vitals hung at the end of the beds. Anna quickly noticed the difference. "In Germany, we write nothing down," she whispered to Greta as they recorded patient notes. "Only what we remember. Here, everything is measured, tracked, studied." Greta shook her head, staring at the columns of numbers. "It is like they treat every birth as science, not fate. Prenatal care." Perhaps the greatest revelation was that mothers arrived weeks, sometimes months, before giving birth. They came for checkups, vitamins, even advice on diet and exercise. One American nurse explained, "We make sure both mother and child are healthy before delivery. Prevention is as important as treatment." The Germans were stunned. In their homeland, expectant mothers often worked in fields until labor began. Many arrived at hospitals already exhausted, malnourished and ill. To see mothers pampered, fed and checked long before labor seemed like a luxury beyond reason. Anna muttered under her breath, "This is why they're children, and look so strong." A new kind of respect. The emotional shock deepened when American mothers began thanking the German nurses personally. One young woman, cradling her newborn, clasped Greta's hand and whispered, "God bless you for helping me." Greta stiffened at first. She had expected suspicion, perhaps even hatred for being German. Instead, she received gratitude. Later that night in the barracks, she admitted softly, "Her words frightened me more than a guard's rifle. To be thanked by the enemy feels dangerous." Anna nodded. "Dangerous because it makes us question why we were told they were monsters." Nutrition and abundance, meals in the maternity ward were another revelation. Plates of meat, vegetables, fruit and milk were delivered daily. Fresh eggs appeared every morning, along with toast and coffee. The German nurses exchanged glances as they watched mothers sip orange juice. In Germany, such luxuries were reserved for officers, if they existed at all. Anna remembered her sister's letter from Dresden. "We eat boiled nettles and potato peels. The children are thin as bones." The memory twisted in her stomach as she set down a plate of food for an American mother who had never gone hungry. "This is why they win," she whispered to Greta. "Not only their soldiers are fed, but their babies before they are born." The role of African American nurses. Another shock came from the staff themselves. Several of the American maternity nurses were African American women, wearing crisp uniforms, moving confidently between beds. They gave orders, adjusted medications, and comforted mothers with practiced ease. At first, the Germans whispered among themselves, unable to reconcile what they saw. Nazi ideology had drilled into them that people of other races were inferior. Yet here, these women were respected professionals. American doctors consulted them, deferred to the their experience. One day, an African-American nurse named Eleanor guided Anna through preparing an incubator. "You must keep the temperature constant," she explained patiently. Anna hesitated, then asked in halting English, "You give orders? Even to American men?" Eleanor smiled. "I give instructions because I know what I'm doing. That's what matters here." The answer struck harder than any lecture. In that moment, Anna realized her entire education in racial hierarchy had been built on lies. Witnessing innovation. Week by week, the German nurses were exposed to technologies their homeland could not match. Incubators for premature babies, humming softly, saving lives that would have been lost in Germany. Vaccinations administered within hours of birth, preventing diseases that had plagued Europe for centuries. Electric heating pads easing pain for mothers, a luxury Anna had never even heard of. Each device represented years of progress their homeland had forfeited by clinging to ideology instead of science. Greta whispered one night, "If every German mother had these machines, perhaps we would not bury so many children." Letters home. The hardest part came with mail from Germany. Families wrote of hunger, bombings, and miscarriages. Greta received news that her cousin had lost a baby during a blackout, unable to find a doctor in time. She wept silently, then confessed to Anna, "Here, even prisoners help babies survive. At home, our children die before they open their eyes." The guilt was unbearable. A shifting identity. By the end of that winter, the German nurses no longer felt like prisoners tending to the enemy. They felt like students in a new world of medicine, one that emphasized science, prevention, and compassion. Anna reflected in her diary. "We thought we were the healers of a superior nation, but here I see what true superiority looks like. It is not conquest. It is not ideology. It is a baby's first breath, safe and strong, in a ward filled with light." The transformation had begun. What had started as captivity was turning into revelation. The enemy had placed them not in chains, but in maternity wards, and in those bright rooms filled with newborn cries, the German nurses were forced to confront a dangerous, undeniable truth. America was not just winning the war with weapons, but with the future itself. By early 1945, the maternity ward had become the place where the German nurses experienced the most profound contradictions of their captivity. They had entered the camp expecting hardship, humiliation, and perhaps even cruelty. Instead, they found themselves caring for enemy mothers and newborns in conditions more humane and advanced than anything they had ever known in their homeland. But with every child born under American care, the weight of their own nation's failures grew heavier. Postnatal care. In Germany, new mothers often returned home within hours, forced to care for themselves and their infants with little guidance. War shortages meant food was scarce, medicine rarer still. Here, in the American maternity ward, mothers stayed for days under constant observation. Nurses checked temperatures, monitored bleeding, ensured milk supply, and provided vitamins. Babies were weighed, vaccinated, and carefully recorded in neat logbooks. Anna Weber found herself astonished every time she opened a chart. "They measure everything," she whispered to Greta. "Weight, temperature, even the color of the child's skin. They do not leave anything to chance." Greta shook her head. "At home, we pray the child survives the first week. Here, they guarantee it." Family visits. The most unsettling experience came when American families were allowed to visit. Fathers in uniform walked into the ward carrying flowers or small gifts, grinning as they held their infants for the first time. For Anna, the sight was almost unbearable. She remembered her sister's letter from Dresden. "The boys grow thin. Father spends nights digging through rubble for wood. There are no doctors left in the city." Here, across the ocean, fathers returned from leave to smiling wives and healthy children. Even in wartime, American families lived with abundance unimaginable to German civilians. One evening after a particularly joyous family visit, Greta confessed in a whisper, "I envy them, and I am ashamed for feeling it." Christmas in the ward, the holiday season of 1944, brought yet another revelation. The American staff decorated the maternity wing with garlands and a small Christmas tree. Red Cross volunteers delivered stockings filled with small toys for newborns and chocolate bars for mothers. The German nurses were stunned. Even in captivity, they were invited to join the celebration. They sang carols alongside their American colleagues, voices mingling in a harmony that made Anna's throat tighten. Later that night, she wrote in her diary, "At home, my family eats tree bark and roots. Here, prisoners sing Christmas hymns in warm rooms lit with electric light. Babies are given chocolate before my nieces and nephews have seen sugar in years. What does this mean? Who is the true barbarian, the one who bombs, or the one who feeds even his enemies' children?" A shocking comparison. The most painful moments came when letters arrived from Germany. One nurse, Clara, received word that her cousin had died during childbirth after a long labor in a bombed-out cellar. Clara broke down, sobbing in the barracks. She died on a floor covered in dust, and here their women lie on clean sheets with nurses and doctors watching every breath. Why must our women suffer while theirs thrive? No one answered. There was no answer. The babies they never had. For some of the German nurses, the maternity ward struck an even deeper wound. They were young women themselves, many in their 20s. In another world, they might have been mothers by now, but the war had stolen that future. Anna found herself lingering by bassinets, watching newborns sleep, their tiny chests rising and falling. One day, an American mother pressed her hand and whispered, "You will make a wonderful mother someday." The words were meant kindly, but they cut like a knife. Anna turned away quickly, fighting tears. In Germany, how many futures had been lost already? How many children would never be born because their mothers starved or their fathers fell on foreign fields? The medical shock continues. Every week brought another discovery. Breast pumps allowed mothers who struggled with feeding to provide milk anyway, something the Germans had never seen. Nutritional supplements ensured mothers regained strength quickly after delivery. Postnatal exercises were taught to help women recover, lessons unheard of in Germany, where survival was the only concern. The German nurses absorbed it all with fascination and dread. They knew they would one day return home with this knowledge, but how could they explain to their people that the enemy had been decades ahead? A moral divide. The American nurses never treated their German counterparts as inferiors. They explained procedures, encouraged questions, and often used the word colleague. One evening, as Anna helped bathe a newborn, Dr. Mitchell, the senior American matron, smiled and said, "You have good instincts, Anna. Never forget, nursing is about life, not nationality." The words lingered long after the baby was wrapped in a blanket. That night, Anna whispered to Greta, "If medicine is about life, then what were we serving in Germany? Death, disguised as science," Greta replied softly. "Perhaps that is why we lost." Breaking point. The ideological collapse reached its breaking point one bitter January night. A premature baby had been born, frail and gasping. The American team rushed the child into an incubator, adjusting temperature and oxygen. Anna stood nearby, helping monitor the infant's tiny heartbeat. Hours later, the baby stabilized. The mother wept with joy, thanking every nurse in the room, including Anna. In Germany, Anna knew, such a child would not have survived a day. She returned to the barracks in silence, then finally whispered to her colleagues, "We are learning here not how to win a war, but how to live after it. America is already building the future, in every baby they save." No one disagreed. The silence was heavy with truth. By the time spring approached, the German nurses no longer saw themselves as prisoners. They were reluctant witnesses to a world their homeland had denied them, a world of abundance, science, and compassion. The maternity ward had not only changed their understanding of nursing, it had broken their faith in everything they had once believed. The war drew closer to its end with every passing week. In the maternity ward, the cries of newborns still filled the air. But outside, radio broadcasts spoke of collapsing fronts, destroyed German cities, and an inevitable Allied victory. For the captured German nurses, this strange pocket of life and abundance felt like a world apart from the ruin consuming their homeland. And yet, they knew they would soon be sent back. The last birth. In March 1945, Anna Weber assisted in what would be her final delivery in American captivity. The mother, a young soldier's wife, laboured under the glow of electric lamps, supported by vitamins, clean linens, and skilled staff. When the baby emerged, wailing and strong, Anna wrapped it in a sterile blanket and handed it to the mother. For the last time, she heard the words, "Thank you, colleague." She held on to that phrase, knowing it might never be spoken to her again in Germany. Farewell lessons. As the nurses prepared for repatriation, the American staff held one final series of lessons. Charts were handed out, documenting methods for sanitation, postnatal care, and infant nutrition. Dr. Mitchell, the matron who had guided them from the start, spoke directly. "You will return to a broken country, but you must not return as broken women. You have learned how to prevent death, how to give mothers strength, how to save children who would otherwise be lost. Carry this knowledge with you, share it, build with it. That is how you redeem what has been destroyed." Anna clutched her notes as if they were sacred texts. Greta whispered, "We are being sent home with a gift greater than any rations, knowledge." Letters from home. The last Red Cross letters before departure painted a grim picture. Cities flattened by bombing, hospitals reduced to rubble, families starving. Anna's sister wrote, "The neighbour's child died during birth. There was no doctor, only us. We tried, but the baby never breathed." Anna read the letter with shaking hands. The cruelty of the contrast was unbearable. Here she had watched incubators hum, vaccines administered, and children thrive. At home, babies died unseen, unrecorded, unremembered. Departure. The day of departure was sombre. The German nurses walked out of the maternity ward for the last time, pausing to touch the incubators, the sterilizers, the lined cribs. Anna whispered softly in German, "One day we will have these too." The American staff escorted them to the transport, shaking hands, even embracing some of the women. For prisoners of war, it was an unthinkable farewell. Dr. Mitchell pressed a small package into Anna's hands. Vitamins, antiseptic, and a pair of medical scissors. "For your work back home. For mothers who need you." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "I will not forget what you taught us." Return to ruins. When their ship docked in Europe months later, the German nurses stepped into a land of ash. Towns lay in ruins, railways twisted, hospitals gutted. Starving families lined the streets. Anna travelled to Dresden, where her sister greeted her with hollow cheeks and trembling hands. "We thought you would come back thin as bones," she whispered. "But you look healthy." Anna did not know how to explain. How could she describe that she had lived better as a prisoner than her family had as free citizens? The first test. Within days, the knowledge carried from America was put to use. A neighbour went into labour in a bombed-out cellar with no doctor available. Anna stepped forward, sterilising instruments with boiling water, guiding the delivery with calm precision. When the child breathed its first cry, the family wept with joy. Anna felt tears of her own. "Without America's lessons," she whispered to herself, this baby would not be alive. Rebuilding, as the months passed, the returned nurses became invaluable. They taught improvised sterilization techniques, introduced prenatal care practices, and spread knowledge of vitamins and nutrition. In destroyed clinics, they improvised incubators with heated water bottles and blankets. Though resources were scarce, the methods worked. Infant mortality began to decline in places where these women taught. Slowly, life pushed back against the shadow of war. Greta told Anna one evening, "We were prisoners, yet we came home with freedom, the freedom of knowledge." The final realization, years later, Anna would look back and understand the deeper meaning. She had entered captivity believing she was superior, believing her nation's ideology made her part of a chosen group. But in American maternity wards, she learned the opposite, that true superiority lay not in conquest, but in compassion, science, and care for the most vulnerable. She wrote in her diary, "The Reich taught us that medicine serves the state. America taught us that medicine serves life. I will never forget which lesson saved more children." Epilogue. Witnesses to a better future. The captured German nurses carried home more than memories. They carried methods that reshaped German nursing schools in the post-war years. Blood plasma, prenatal care, infant nutrition, sterilization practices, all became part of the new medical culture. When Anna saw her first German hospital rebuilt with incubators and X-ray machines, she whispered to herself, "This is the future I first saw as a prisoner." She and her colleagues had been shocked, humbled, and transformed. They were not just prisoners of war. They were witnesses to the power of medicine when it is freed from ideology. And in every healthy child they helped deliver after the war, the lessons of their captivity lived on.